Hey Rob, good to see you again. I feel like it's been so long we haven't gotten to connect.
I know, we've been so busy with all of our listeners messaging us, and it's just been nonstop.
All
uh,
four of you, thank you.
Thank you for joining. Welcome back. How's July going for you?
It's good. I feel like once July 1st hit, I was like, okay, I really have 2 months of this summer, so I'm going to try to be a little bit more deliberate about recognizing that this is a special time. So it's good. I'm trying to take each day as it comes. How about you guys? You're hitting the beach, I hear?
Nice. Yeah, we've got some good beach time coming up. We have the exciting trying to get the kids' passports today. So
Oh, that'll be
just
fun.
thrills galore.
I can imagine.
Oh my goodness. So let's chat a little bit about the piece that we were fortunate to write together. I love this concept you brought to the group about Shoshin and a beginner's mindset. Let's talk through that a little bit.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. I mean, I love you know me, I'm like always trying to think of something zen to counteract or balance the everyday life. And I love this idea, when July hits, especially you and I, we've been doing this for so long, right? It's over 10 years. It's another July. This is not including training. And you're like, oh my God, okay, new trainees. And there's this excitement, but there's also like, okay, there's new trainees, but what about, what does that mean for me at this stage of our lives and our career? And I love this concept of a beginner's mind, which is like that when you approach things with this humility and this idea of like, my God, there's always something to learn. There's always something to improve upon. Every day, for that matter, is like a new opportunity to like change how we do things, how we see things. Then it doesn't feel like a drag ever, And so we were thinking, and you and I were talking about this, about how July marks the start of a new sort of era for so many trainees, people starting new jobs, but it could also be the same thing for us. What did you think of that?
Yeah, I mean, you said it so nicely that we often think of January as starting off a new year, but for those of us that have this academic cycle where every July there's new trainees and the things are fresh on the wards, it's a great point mid-year to think, all right, how do we really ramp things up the next couple of months and enjoy things in new and creative ways? So that's what it meant to me. And as I reread it again this morning, I think it hopefully offers a little bit of something for all of our different readers. And I loved how you helped frame it, whether you're just starting fellowship, whether you're starting your first faculty job, maybe you're opening a new lab, wherever you are in this, that we can experience new and exciting things and try to be better versions of ourselves.
Yeah, I actually love that. It's funny because I just read a New York Times article about how July 2nd marks the exact midway point for the year. And like, I agree with you. I honestly, in some ways, dread the new year because I'm like, oh my God, I got to work out more. I got to sleep more. I got to get less frustrated, all the traditional New Year's resolutions. And I like this idea of taking pause in July and being like, okay, I've got 6 months left in 2025. So what is it that I want to kind of work on, et cetera. So I love that take on it.
Spot on. So we challenge our listeners to really think through how you can work to be a better version of yourself, be open to new and creative things coming forward. So with that, welcome back to JCF. I'm Dr. Robert Mentz.
And I'm Dr. Anu Lala. And today it's really cool. We're exploring a study that challenges some sort of long-standing assumptions. But I think this field is evolving so much, so I'm really excited to talk to you about it. It's really about GLP-1 receptor agonists, not in patients with obesity, which is what we typically think as kind of a knee-jerk reflex, but in patients without it, with a history of heart failure with preserved ejection fraction.
Yeah, so that's exactly right. So this is a nice article from Dr. Kodke and colleagues, and it looks at GLP-1s in this evolving, exciting era using real-world evidence, right? So it's not randomized trial data, but looking in trinetics and looking at this patient subgroup of HFpEF that we really don't have randomized trial data on, right? So it's looking at those without obesity. So to me, it's helpful as we start to think of the evolving randomized trial data and who were the patients included in those studies, right? So it was all HFpEF with or without diabetes, but had to have a BMI of 30 or higher. So are we thinking, are GLP-1s, is it a foundational therapy? Is it just in a subset? And now we've got some data here that I think start to really tease this out. What were some of your initial thoughts as we look at how the study was designed, the patient population, and maybe some of what they found?
Yeah, thanks. I before that, when I think this space is just beyond fascinating, because I think that these medications have also afforded this new opportunity, speaking of a beginner's mindset, of kind of reinventing how we also think of heart failure being connected to prevention. Like if we look at some of the other society recommendations, like the American Diabetes Association or the American Association of endocrinology, or even KDIGO, GLP-1 receptor agonists are indicated in patients with type 2 diabetes and chronic kidney disease, regardless of the BMI, right? For the purpose of improving cardiovascular outcomes. So it's like outright sort of stated there. That's without the BMI restriction. Of course, we know weight loss is a frequent effect, but it's not a prerequisite for starting or indication for these drugs. And then we think about how this expands into our, heart failure, heart function space. And we all are familiar with the most recent studies with Summit and with STEP-HFpEF with and without diabetes. So I think that this is a nice piece of literature. And of course, we have to admit at the outset, and I'm sure we'll talk about some of the limitations, this is observational data. Residual confounding, no matter what we do, is inherent to this type of study design. But it is interesting to think about, if I have a patient with HFpEF and they don't meet traditional obesity definitions, what are the indications for starting a GLP-1 receptor agonist? And I think that the reason I wanted to go back to the ADA and the other society guidelines is there is an indication for the treatment of diabetes and CKD. So I put that as kind of a framework. With respect to how this was designed, I think you already kind of stated it nicely. It's real world data. It's over 40,000 patients. And put broadly, and we'll get into some of the nitty gritty, I'm sure, is what they report is a 33% relative risk reduction in heart failure exacerbations and a 17.5% relative risk reduction in all-cause emergency room visits and hospitalizations. And this was after propensity score matching, and we'll talk a little bit about those characteristics. What were your initial, sort of observations, take-homes from this?
Yeah, well, I have to admit, I've been of this mindset of thinking, just as you described, that if we've got all of these studies in patients with diabetes or kidney disease showing these cardiovascular benefits with GLP-1s, are we thinking about things differently or maybe even incorrectly, too narrowly in HFpEF, just based on study design of some of the randomized trials, right? So in order to enrich the population, the earlier studies, like you noted, Summit and STEP, HFpEF required a BMI of 30 or greater. But are these actually heart failure drugs? And thus far, the majority of our data is in preserved ejection fraction heart failure, as we'll talk today. So to me, these were super timely data, especially as we think, will there be subsequent trials even in HFpEF or maybe even HFrEF without obesity with some of these agents? So we have to use the evidence we have to help inform our clinical decisions. And you said it so nicely. You've got a patient sitting in front of you with diabetes or sleep apnea or kidney disease. We're thinking, appropriate use of SGLT2s as indicated, GLP-1s as indicated. But how do we help manage the whole story for our patients with heart failure, even as we may not have the randomized trial data yet?
Yeah, completely. I mean, I think, not to belabor the point, but I think when there are other indications for these medications, I think we need to recognize that they're also applicable. I mean, Select, for that matter, also had a population that had a history of heart failure. We don't have some of that granular data, and more of those patients had HFpEF than HFrEF, but they were included in Select, which was over 17,000 patients. And it seemed, at least from some of the sub-analyses, that the results of benefit seemed consistent across those subgroups. And so, again, they're subgroups. We all know the caveats there, but I, for one, in my clinical practice, am looking at the other indications. But getting back to this study, because I could go on and on about this, so I apologize. I think, some of the things that you look at the outset, I think, why do we use propensity score matching? I think when there are large differences in the baseline characteristics between patients who got GLP-1 receptor agonists and those who didn't, then propensity score matching is one way where you're trying to create more similar groups as compared to traditional regression adjustment. So I think that's a potential strength of this study. It's large numbers. It's a real world cohort. Um, and we'll get back to some of the confounding. And I think the authors tried to do a decent job in minimizing as much bias as possible with adjusting for demographics, comorbidities, medications, laboratory values, and these are all listed in their table 1. But with a kind of stricter boundary to ensure that the groups were as similar as they could be in this type of analysis, in this type of cohort.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So it's complicated when you've got a rapidly evolving space and different indications for use of GLP-1s, geographic, practice level variation. But I think the authors did a really nice job of trying to compare apples to the extent possible through their methodological approach, and then really focusing on the GLP-1 element in this population with HFpEF based on ejection fraction of 45% or higher, just as some of the trials did, elevated natriuretic peptide levels, and then BMI data, and then took a nice dive and also focused on that subgroup that had background SGLT2 inhibitor, and then looked at the treatment associations with GLP-1 or no in those groups. So provided the data we need to better understand the possible treatment effects that we could see if we were to do a randomized trial in this space, just as you're describing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the preponderance of data is showing us that there is likely a benefit that is extended beyond the populations that are traditionally or have been studied to date in our field of heart failure. And I think things are only going to continue to expand. So the big question that comes up now is, what about those patients with heart failure and reduced ejection fraction, right? And this is kind of a debate where I think we're going to see this kind of debate at HFSA. We're going to see potentially this type of thing at THT and many of our other meetings is, do we use the data we have to extrapolate and say, hey, you meet this indication? Certainly, I think there's less hesitation to doing so in the HFpEF space because we do have some randomized control data in that space. And then some of the worry in the HFrEF space really comes from the increase in heart rate and some of the signal towards harm with previous trials looking at GLP-1 receptor agonists.
Yeah, nicely said. So, lots of exciting data here from a robustly designed observational study that helps inform our practice, right? So I can think I had a patient in clinic on Monday with reduced ejection fraction heart failure and is wondering about starting a GLP-1 to help manage his sleep apnea and his diabetes, and asked, well, doc, do we have data in this space? And we don't yet around HFrEF and GLP-1s. And in this new study now in the HFpEF space helps us creep into that lower BMI group below 30, where we can think that there probably is an association with benefit as well. So that's it for episode 2. These are really quick, and if you haven't yet read this article, please take a deep dive. And if you missed our first episode, take a look back. We hope you really enjoyed these times to connect and talk through great articles in JCF.
Thanks so much for joining us. Always great to talk to you, Rob.